Anse, I'm Krisanachkate. Welcome to APTN National News. Thank you for joining us. A young girl is happy to be alive after being attacked by 10 dogs in a First Nation in Manitoba, but others want justice for her severe injuries. Here's Sav Jones with more.
That was my first time getting hurt like that.
Little 9-year-old Heavenly Monias is grateful to be alive after being attacked by 10 dogs while out for a walk in Norway House Cree Nation in Manitoba. She says she was with her family's female dog who was in heat.
Those dogs just came running up to me and then started attacking me. Then I started crying because I was scared if they would kill or give me a lot of bites. But mostly there was just scratches instead of bites. There was only 2 bites.
Monias suffered serious injuries from the large dogs. Her cheek was ripped open from ear to mouth. Puncture wounds line one arm, and she has scratch marks throughout her body. A Good Samaritan stepped in and got Heavenly out of the tussle. She was medevaced almost 500 kilometers south to Winnipeg's Children's Hospital for care. After more than 2 weeks in the city, it's time to go home, but that poses another challenge.
I'm just scared to go back to Norway House because of those dogs.
Her grandmother, Lorraine Trout, is still upset at what happened. She wasn't at the scene of the attack, but remembers when she first saw her granddaughter at the nursing station.
And one of the nurses stopped me and said, "Prepare what you're going to see." I said, "Okay." And then when I seen her, the way she looked, I just started crying. And I was pissed off at the same time. And I'm still pissed off.
She says the response time of the ambulance attending the scene was slow. She says there was no siren, and it seemed the EMS were only driving the 50-kilometer speed limit. APTN News reached out to Shared Health, the provincial health authority, to see if this was normal. A Shared Health spokesperson states in part, "We confirm this call was triaged by the Medical Transportation Coordination Center as being a priority 1, the highest priority, and an ambulance arrived at the scene within 13 minutes of the call being received. This is well within provincial benchmarks and similar to median response times for high priority calls in that community." Lorraine says dog attacks are a growing issue in her community and that they still don't know who the dog's owners are. Councillor Dion Clark says the community has a band council resolution that they will destroy any dogs who threaten others. He says other changes are being made for community safety, like a bylaw enforcing owners to register their dogs.
We're also hiring our own animal control officer, and that's controlling, that's one person is the dogs, and we're also looking at the bear, any kind of animal issues we're hiring that. And we're also ordering another building that will be able to house and take care of these animals that are captured and held in our kennels.
For the short term, Trout hopes something will be done with the dogs to give her granddaughter comfort coming home.
I hope they can at least take them away, catch them, and remove them from Norway House.
Sav Jones, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
A protest against the Winnipeg Police Service is underway this hour after a woman in her 30s was struck and killed on Monday night. With more on the protest, our Sav Jones gives us an update. Sav?
Thanks, Creason. I'm at the intersection of Portage and Main in downtown Winnipeg, where a march is about to begin en route to the Winnipeg Police Headquarters. Community members here are calling for more accountability from police after a woman in her 30s was killed after being hit by a police cruiser Monday night. Police were returning a different individual home to an encampment along a river bank in the Fort Rouge Park near here. It was at that time that they say they collided with Tammy Bateman, a resident of that encampment. They say she was given emergency medical care and transported to hospital in critical condition, where she later succumbed to her injuries. The Independent Investigation Unit of Manitoba is investigating and say that there were witnesses. I'll have more on this developing story tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern.
Thank you for that, Sav. In the wake of the brutal killings of 4 Indigenous women in Winnipeg by a serial killer, the Manitoba government says it's exploring options for increased monitoring and surveillance of garbage trucks in landfills. The province has issued a request for proposals to explore GPS monitoring of garbage trucks. The province says it's an effort to take further action to help police investigate crimes while ensuring Indigenous lives are given the value and dignity they deserve. The process is expected to be completed by the summer of 2025. The family of Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron, whose remains are believed to be in a landfill north of the city of Winnipeg, welcomed the news, saying it was an initiative they pushed for. Indigenous people in BC will have more access to culturally safe primary health care in the future. On Tuesday, the province of BC and BC's First Nations Health Authority announced it is moving ahead with 13 First Nations primary care centres. 10 of those centres will be ready to welcome patients by the fall and will be located in various First Nations in the Gitxsan and Treaty 8 territory. The centres will provide primary health care, social services, and Indigenous health supports. BC's health minister says the centres will help eradicate Indigenous-specific racism. A First Nation in southwestern BC has removed a chief for alleged misconduct. Former Chehalis First Nation chief Ralph Leon Jr. is accused of unauthorized or unverified spending, pay advances, excessive technology purchasing, and failure to attend critical meetings. On August 27th, following an investigation, Chehalis First Nation Council met with Leon Jr. and gave him a chance to respond to the allegations. Council then determined that the allegations were substantiated. On August 30th, Council unanimously passed a resolution to remove the chief in accordance to its custom election code. A statement from Chehalis Council reads, in part, as a result of the chief's misconduct in response and his breach of the safeguards, the chief broke this commitment, and council believes that he failed to act in accordance with his fiduciary duties to the membership. The council will be letting band members know what happens next in the coming weeks. The 1,100 members of Chehalis First Nation is 140 kilometers east of Vancouver in the Fraser Valley. The Yukon government has launched an independent review of a major equipment failure at Victoria Gold's Eagle Gold Mine site. The 3-person independent review board will investigate the June 24th incident that occurred near Mayo, Yukon. An equipment failure at the mine's heap leach facility, say 4 million liters of cyanide solution leaked into nearby watersheds on the traditional territory of the First Nation Nacho Nayakdan. The 3 board members are engineering experts Jean-Marie Conrad, Les Sawatsky, and Mark E. Smith. The review is expected to take 6 to 8 months to complete. Last week, the First Nation accused the government of excluding it from the review process. We're always looking for your feedback or story ideas. Here's how you can continue the conversation. If you have a story you want to share, send us an email to news@aptn.ca. To read and watch our stories, go to www.aptnnews.ca. You can find us online on your favorite social media sites, including TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. A First Nation in Alberta is reclaiming its traditional name. That story and more when we come back in about 3 minutes. Stick around. Welcome back. A First Nation west of Calgary is officially reclaiming its traditional Stoney Nakoda name. The settlement of Morley will now be called Minithni, marking the beginning of a healing journey for community members. CTV's Mark Villani has more.
The drums beat in unison, all while elders march with pride. It's a grand entrance signifying an entirely new beginning for the Stoney Nakoda First Nation.
Our ancestors have told us that this is where we are, this is where we'll be buried, and to hold that true to this day and to carry it on to our next generation, it is meaningful.
The settlement of Morley is being renamed to Minithni. Directly translated from the Stoney language, it means cold water, representing an enduring connection to the Bow River. The Nation says the old Morley name was originally tied to colonialism, left with the stain of a residential school and decades of intergenerational trauma.
It is a first step in, I believe, in the reconciliation process.
Jeanette Wildman is a Morley Indian residential school survivor. She says this change brings a new sense of hope.
Be proud of who you are as Stoney Nakoda people. Be respectful of the land that we live in and go back to your roots.
Those roots go way back. Tobias Ear is holding the original Union Jack flag from the 1870s when Treaty 7 itself was signed. He hopes the renaming encourages the next generation to keep their culture alive.
It's a new perspective in life. They probably want to speak more of their language.
That's how we communicate with our elders and people that never went to get their further education. We still utilize the language.
And asserting cultural sovereignty has some hoping this will set a precedent for future name changes.
There was names for these areas, so it'd be nice if, Alberta, Canada would recognize.
Stay strong with your culture, your traditional ways.
Mark Villani, CTV News, Minisni.
First Nations from across Saskatchewan attended the annual First Nations Provincial Firefighting Competition held by the Saskatchewan First Nation Emergency Management in the city of Prince Albert. The two-day event began with the Structural Fire Training Day, where rescue experts trained First Nation volunteer firefighters life-saving skills and safety practices. On day 2, 7 teams from across the province competed, showcasing skills such as donut rolls, respirator use, and ladder placement. Fond du Lac Denisovan Nation claimed the grand prize and will advance to nationals in Richmond, BC this October. Celebrations in Prince Albert got underway last week as the province unveiled 4 new treaty boundary signs. The signs will be placed along Saskatchewan highways to welcome people to the treaty territory. And as Stacey Hine tells us, it is hoped that the signs will help bring further awareness of the treaties.
Communities are coming together to celebrate these new highway signs that mark treaty boundaries.
It makes treaties more real because it's a visible reminder that they exist and will continue to exist.
Lieutenant Governor Russell Morasti says while Saskatchewan includes treaties in the education system, these signs take it to the next step because it raises awareness and sparks conversations for residents and those passing through.
So it's such an important day. It's an important step to furthering that awareness of treaties.
The signs welcome people as they move through treaty territories. Each one includes Indigenous languages specific to their locations and the treaty medals provided to First Nations following the treaty negotiations. The signs will mark boundaries for Treaty 5, 6, 6A, and 10.
We worked to find the accurate treaty boundary locations for these signs, and we did that by using our First Nations elders' oral history, as well as the archives at our office at the OTC.
The first pair of signs to acknowledge treaty boundaries were installed along Highway 11 between Saskatoon and Regina in 2022. The following year, signs were installed in the Estevan, Moosomin, and Lanigan areas to mark Treaty 2, 4, and 6. Athabasca MLA Jim Lemag says the signs mark a significant milestone on the path to reconciliation.
In order for us to move forward, we have to have communication and opening doors for each other on all levels of government and all levels of communities.
These signs are expected to go up by the end of the year. Stacey Hine, CTV News, Prince Albert.
As children in BC make their way back to class, the province's teachers union is growing concerned about staffing shortages in some districts. Staffing levels have been an ongoing issue in the province, and the union predicts it will only get worse. It says the province needs an additional 20,000 teachers and 7,000 teaching assistants over the next 10 years to keep pace with growing enrollment numbers. The union says staff shortages have the greatest impact on vulnerable students.
Well, I think it's going to look like the last few years, which unfortunately means teachers being pulled from the non-enrolling positions that support the most vulnerable students to be put in a classroom, teachers not able to get the proper preparation time, probably more uncertified teachers being hired across the province than anyone would like.
With the provincial election looming next month, the teachers' union says it will be looking closely at the party's plans for education. Tanya Taga's new book, The Knowing, is out now. We will have her in studio next to tell us all about the new book. We're back in less than 3 minutes. Stick around. Over on the East Coast, St. John's 20, Charlottetown 23. Cartwright 23 as well, La Grande River 10. Saguenay 24, Val-d'Or 14. Toronto 25, Sault Ste. Marie 17. 24 in Timmins, Thunder Bay 19. 14 in God's Lake, Thompson 17. 20 in Winnipeg, 19 in Prince Harbour. Regina 24, Saskatoon 22. Orange 20, Stony Rapids 15. 18 in Fort Chipewyan, Peace River 20. 22 in Medicine Hat, 21 in Red Deer. 23 in Tofino, Kamloops 31. 22 in Fort Nelson, Smithers 24. 15 in Beaver Creek, Mayo 17. Yellowknife 16, Wrigley 19. Sax Harbor 5, Inuvik 16. Chesterfield 6, Baker Lake 11. And Iqaluit 9 and Iqaluit 4. Tanya Taga is an Anishinaabe and Polish award-winning author and journalist, and known for her work highlighting Indigenous issues in Canada, and has now released her latest book. The Knowing follows her previous best-selling book, 7 Fallen Feathers, which examined the deaths of 7 Indigenous students in Thunder Bay. The Knowing is a personal story of her great-great-grandmother and her family. Tanya joined me earlier to tell us more about the book. Tanya, thank you for talking to us. The Knowing is your latest work, which is available now online and in bookstores. Can you let our viewers know what made you write this latest book?
Bonjour. I wrote The Knowing. Well, it's been a long time in the making, many years, many decades. It was actually started by my uncle Hank Bowen, and he was looking for any information he could find on his mom Liz and his grandma Annie. And when he died, he left all of his papers, all of his research information to our family, and my mom gave it to me. And I didn't know much about Annie other than what Uncle Hank had left us, and all he could find was a death certificate. And the death certificate said that she died in 1937, and she had been a patient at the Ontario Hospital, and that she was buried somewhere in Toronto.
Wow, and so this book kind of takes us on that journey to know more about your great-great-grandmother.
Yeah, it does. And, you know, people would ask, well, why did you decide to do something on your great-great-grandma? Well, we didn't know anything about her, you know, and to us, we always had questions as to, do we have family members that didn't come home from residential schools or from Indian hospitals? Why did Liz, Annie's daughter, my great-grandma, who raised my mom, why was she so quiet? Why did she say nothing about who she was, her past, her language? Why did she hate everything about herself and talk only about the nuns all the time when she was growing up? And so it was a real examination. I was looking for what my Uncle Hank was looking for, what happened to Liz and what happened to Annie. And it was so important for me to start with her because we later found out that she was born in 1871, and that was 5 years before the Indian Act became law, and it was just after Sir John A. Macdonald bought Rupert's Land from the Hudson's Bay Company. And this was a pivotal moment in the history of this country we now call Canada. You know, the sale, quote unquote, of that land, and what happened to all of our people that were in the fur trade, that were working, that were forced into labor for the Hudson Bay Company and for other merchants. What happened to our families? that was the search for Annie, and it dovetailed into what was going on at Kamloops when the 215 was first announced. I realized it was all part of the same story.
Yeah, and so this book tells a personal story about your family and how the impacts of colonization has just rippled not only your family, but many families, many Indigenous families.
Absolutely, and that was part of the reason why I felt I really had to write this book. You know, I wanted to write a book on Volume 4 of the TRC. I remember when the TRC came out, and I remember reading Volume 4. It's, you know, it's the volume on the children that didn't come home, and it named for the first time, or not named, it put a number, a quantity, and at the time the TRC said there was about 3,700 children that died at the schools. But they had no money to research it. They didn't know what had happened to all the children. And I remember as a journalist wondering why it was that we weren't doing more about it. And I started to look into that, and I realized that this was all the same story, and that all of us as First Nations people, we all have this story in our families. We all know of someone who didn't come home from an Indian hospital, from a residential school, or a tuberculosis sanitaria. It turns out Annie was put in a quote-unquote lunatic asylum, which was the Ontario hospital, and every single province had one of these hospitals for, well, I'm not going to say what they called her, but our people are in these institutions, and we have to find where they are and bring them home. And that became the story of the knowing, and I know that all of us share parts of that same story.
Yeah. Now that the knowing is released, Tanya, what are you hoping readers will get from hearing your story and your family's story?
I hope that all of our people realize that they can do the same thing. It takes a while and it's not easy, but we have to research into our past and find out what happened to those lost loved ones, what happened to our relations. We're all part of this same story about colonization in Canada, about the Indian Act, about children that didn't come home. And if we start looking for them, following the paper trail, which is super hard considering a lot of the records are destroyed or missing, I hope we can retell the narrative of this country we call Canada and tell the true history of this country through our eyes, every single one of us.
The Knowing is out now in bookstores and online across the country. Tanya Taga, thank you for chatting with us. I'm looking forward to picking up your book this week.
Jimmy Gwitch, thank you.
And that's your midday newscast for this Wednesday, September 4th. Welcome back to school for all the grade school kids and high school kids. We'll be back again in a few hours with more stories for your evening newscasts. Make sure to join us then. From everyone at APTN National News, hi miigwech, masicho. Thank you for watching.